Now, we have read the affixes, we have also given our first reactions to these. So, the question is, are these new affixes coming in Season 2 actually that terrible? Or is it more like a first reaction, overreaction from the player base about these Afflicted, Entangling and Incorporeal affixes joining Season 2 of Mythic Plus? Let me start by saying one thing before we begin. You might have read already, or you might have been one of the guys with the opinion that, for example, it wasn't fair for Blizzard to remove affixes like volcanic or affixes like quaking, which players were fine with, which players did not think were that bad, but keeping in the game affixes like spiteful or affixes like sanguine, which players did not like. If we were to listen to the player base, if we were to poll the players on things to be removed from Mythic Plus, that does not mean it would make the game better, right? If we were to poll the players right now and ask them, do you want the Chill Storm ability from the first boss of Ruby Life Pools to be removed from the game, many players would say yes. Do you want the Blazebound Destroyer's Inferno cast from the trash mobs of Ruby Life Pools to be removed from the game? Many players would say yes. And do you even want the Inferno Core cast of the last boss of Ruby Life Pools to be removed from the game? Many players would say yes. And now Ruby Life Pools can be done at a plus 34 key level without a healer, because you just listened to the player base and removed every single damage ability from the dungeon. So, just the fact that the player base was happy with keeping Volcanic in the affix pool of Mythic Plus does not mean it was a good idea, because Volcanic was a joke that had no reason to exist, really, as an affix. So it's not a bad thing that we are getting new affixes and new complicated or complex affixes. It can be a bad thing if these complicated affixes are also frustrating, are also annoying to deal with, right? Those are not the good type of difficult affixes you want to play around with in Mythic Plus. So, talking about the added affixes, let's just get rid of what seems to be the by far easiest of the newly introduced affixes, which is Entangling. I think players, if there is one affix where players definitely have been overreacting, is Entangling. Because what the tooltip says is that an Entangling Vine snares players, reducing their movement speed by 50%. After 8 seconds, the vine entangles players, stunning them for 3 seconds. Players can snap the vine by moving 10 yards away from the vine that spawned on the ground. So this is what can players do to get rid of the vine. Now, as you can see, pretty much every single spec in the game can instantly remove the vines. Pretty much instantly. You can either dispel it or remove it on yourself with something like Death's Advance for Death Knights, Shapeshift for Druids, Tiger's Lust for Monks, and Blessing of Freedom for Paladins. You can also just blink or dash or leap away. You can charge, intervene, and heroic leap. If you're a warrior, you can demonic circle. If you're a warlock, you can blink as a mage, disengage as a hunter, you can hover as an evoker, and you can fell rush or infernal strike as a demon hunter. So pretty much everyone is able to just immediately remove this entire affix with one button. So this seems to be by far the easiest one to get rid of and the one that will cause the least amount of problems. Of course, the only possible issue is whether or not we know in advance when it's going to spawn. Sort of like Thundering. There are already existing weak auras which can track almost by the second the 1 minute cooldown of Thundering. So you know when Thundering is about to spawn. If you have the same thing for Entangling, so you know that in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 you're about to be slowed, it's basically a joke. If you don't know, if it's completely random, then it might create some problems, right? There are quite a few things you want to dodge in Mythic Plus. The swirlies, the cone abilities, the frontals, the line abilities, all the shit that is being thrown at you, especially in trash packs in Mythic Plus, can become quite a surprise when you get slowed by 50% as you are trying to deal with it, right? So that is perhaps the most dangerous part of Entangling, whether or not you will be able to know, to predict when the debuff on you, the slow on you, is going to happen. If you know in advance, if you can prepare in advance, as mentioned, every single class in the game can basically remove Entangling almost immediately. So it is by far the most manageable out of the 3 new affixes. Now, let's talk about the other 2. One is Afflicted. So from the way the tooltip reads, it's going to be spawning with 3 debuffs on itself, and you have 2 options to despawn this ad. Either you heal it to full, or you dispel one of these 3 debuffs. As per the tooltip's description, removing any of these afflictions or restoring the spirit to full health. So either you remove one of these or you heal the HP to full. This is also not nearly as bad, because even if you were to make a comp in Mythic Plus without a single dispel available from these 3 from 4 out of 5 players, for example, Demon Hunter Tank, Demon Hunter DPS, Warrior DPS, and Warlock DPS, you have 0 disease dispels, 0 poison, and 0 curse dispels out of those 4 players. You still need a healer, and every single healer is going to have at least 1 of these dispels. So no matter the composition you run in Mythic Plus, your healer will always be able to dispel one of these 3 things, therefore completely negating this affix essentially very, very quickly. Obviously, thing can be made even easier if you bring DPS specs or even tank specs with curse, disease, and poison dispels. For example, Druid, Mage, Shaman, Monk, Paladin, Priest, all these specs have an assortment of curse or disease or poison dispels, even if they are not a healer, right? Like a Mage with a curse dispel, for example, or something like a Paladin with a poison dispel, etc, etc. So this also seems like a reasonably simple affix. Ironically, the most difficult part of this affix will be where is this thing spawning, where in the frames of the healers is this spawning, is this even going to be visible on the frames of the healer, or will the healer have to actually target the mob spawning in-game, like as the model spawning in-game and not be visible in its frame. That actually seems to be the hardest part of this affix. So besides that, it does not seem to be that big of an issue. The only annoyance, of course, is that many times this will just be an extra burden on the healer, right? An extra thing to keep track of if you are a healer, which is not that nice, right? More pressure, okay? More responsibility on the healer. But besides that, this affix as well does not seem too problematic once you look at it. What might be a bit more annoying is Incorporeal, because from what we know from the data mining is that this is an ad that spawns with a 20 seconds duration. He is invulnerable, takes 99% less damage, not affected by AoE effects, and just despawns by itself after 20 seconds. He will also start casting the Stabilize, which is going to make your party deal 50% reduced damage. Now, this is a massive cast. It's an 8-second long cast, so it's not something that you need to deal with very, very quickly. Okay, it's quite large of a window to deal with this cast, which means effectively, if it lasts for 20 seconds and has an 8-second cast, you basically just need 3 sources of crowd controls to just make sure it won't have the time to cast this thing during its 20 seconds duration, right? So you interrupt the first one after 6 seconds, and then you stun it, and then you interrupt again 10 seconds later, and then the ad is gone, right? That's just one of the ways you can deal with this. One of the more important parts of Incorporeal as an affix is knowing where this will spawn, because there's going to be, of course, a big difference whether or not this Incorporeal affix mob will spawn on top of the group, on top of the pack of enemies you are fighting, or if it's going to be spawning randomly in the vicinity of one of the players. Because if it does, for example, it's further back or further to the side of the pack you're fighting, then something like Freezing Trap something like blind, depending on which type of enemy this is. If it's a humanoid, a ghost, an undead, then also it might be polymorphed, it might be hexed, it might be incapacitated, it might be imprisoned, it might be shackled. So that would make it even more trivial, right? You're fighting as a healer, there is a pack of 8 enemies in front of you, and then to your right, this guy spawns. You turn around, you hex it, and you go on with your business. And then the affix is just gone. Obviously, if this guy instead spawns next to the enemies you're fighting, then of course this type of crowd control wouldn't work, because you would just break it by doing damage to the rest of the enemies. So you would have to deal with it the same way you deal with all of the other attempts at casting and doing things from the mobs in the group. This of course might make it a bit more annoying, because yes, in the next season we will have a different type of rotation for Mythic Plus, but imagine this spawning during, for example, Halls of Valor. You're pulling a Mystic, which is trying to cast the AoE heal, you're pulling the Rune Carver, which is trying to cast the Echo damaging ability, and then you're pulling the Thundercaller, which is doing the Thunderous Bolt damaging ability, and now you also have this guy trying to cast this Destabilize ability. So now it's just an extra thing you have to interrupt, an extra thing you have to stop on top of all of the other things that you have to stop in Mythic Plus. This has been one of the main complaints in this new season of Mythic Plus, the amount of clutter, the amount of stuff on your screen that you need to pay attention to. Frontals, corner abilities, dangerous casts, dangerous uninterruptible casts, which need to be hard crowd controlled, right? All of these things happening at once, and now you also have this extra cast to keep track of. So that perhaps is going to be the more annoying thing of this Incorporeal affix, given, once again, given that this ad will spawn close to the enemies you're fighting. Because if it doesn't, as I said, if it spawns far enough away that you can single long duration crowd control it, like a freezing trap, then it will basically nullify, it will basically trivialize the whole affix. So with all of this being said and done, I don't think for now the overreaction has been quite correct on these 3 affixes. I think they are somewhat easier than we might have guessed at first glance. And now all that is left is basically wait for them to be properly implemented into the PTR and actually being able to start testing them in Mythic Plus. So for now, I am going to keep some cautious optimism about how these affixes are going to function in Mythic Plus, hoping that I am not jinxing myself and jinxing anyone who will be playing in Mythic Plus with these affixes. For now, however, we are stopping on this Friday with this. Of course, you can guys let me know what were your first impressions about these 3 affixes in the comments, if you are nearly as optimistic as I am, or if you are completely on board on the doomer train of opinions about these new affixes coming in Mythic Plus. You can let me guys know down in the comments. But for now, I'm going to leave you to the rest of your Friday, according to some, the beginning of the weekend. So with this out of the way, we are going to start thanking, of course, as usual, all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel. You can still support, of course, in other ways, including liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself, which are completely free. Other free ways to support would include following me over on my Twitter, as well as, of course, following me over on my stream on Twitch. So with these useless things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, no, but for real, I am actually high on hopium right now. I don't think these 3 affixes are nearly as bad as they first sounded.